Welcome to another episode of Savor Food and Body. Today I'm talking with Sabrina Magnan, a holistic health coach who helps chronic dieters heal their relationship with food and overcome binge, emotional, and overeating so they can spend less time thinking about food and eat without guilt and shame, which who doesn't want all of that stuff? And specifically, Sabrina and I are going to talk more about the body image piece to this work because it's getting to be warmer weathers, at least in the Pacific Northwest where we're recording this. And so we start to be thinking about maybe wearing the shorter pants, the short sleeve shirts, and it can really bring up a lot of like, oh, my body did that over the winter time. How do I deal with that? So we're going to dive more into some of Sabrina's strategies of how to work through body image challenges as we get into warmer weather and wearing less clothes. So Sabrina, thanks so much for being here today. It's wonderful to meet you and get to learn from you today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to talk about body image. It's at the root of a lot of our eating issues, and especially now that, like you said, summer's coming around, we're trying on last year's pants, they're not fitting. A lot of thoughts can come up, so I'm really excited to talk about this with you.
So why don't we just start with your own story? You have a personal story with body dysmorphia or that angst that comes with how we perceive our bodies and how we think other people perceive our bodies.
Mhm.
And so if we can walk through your story as kind of an example, and then I'm sure people will also find their experience, identify with their experience in your story.
Yeah, so my story is a little unique in the sense that I developed a really unhealthy beliefs around food and around my body through my sport, which was synchronized swimming. So if you're not familiar with the sport, it's girls walking around in bathing suits all day on a pool deck. And if you were to look at like the top elite athletes in synchronized swimming, they all look the same. They're all tall, extremely thin. Think of like dancers and ballet. It's very much in the same realm. And it's a judged sport. And so it's based off of what other people think of you. And so you're often seeing girls who are extremely talented not making the top teams because maybe they don't have the bodies that other girls do. And so, obviously, when you're growing up in that, I did synchronized swimming from the age of 8 until 16, and then I coached for a couple of years. Growing up in that, you don't know what you don't know. And so, your beliefs around your body are forming, and you're not questioning them because that's all you ever know. And when I retired from the sport at 16, I developed this really intense fear of gaining weight because there was like this thing going around in synchronized swimming. It was this thing that everyone knew about, which was a lot of athletes when they stopped the sport would gain some weight and people would talk about it because of course when you're no longer training 20-25 hours a week, your body is going to start settling into that set point weight that you're meant to be at. When I was swimming, I was training so much that it didn't matter what I was eating. I was always burning it off. Like the goal was about performance. And so I was terrified of being one of those people who would gain a bunch of weight after stopping the sport. And there'd be comments made by people around me of like, whoa, if you keep eating this way, you're going to balloon up when you stop swimming. And sure enough, when I stopped swimming, my body started to change. My hips started to get larger. I no longer had a thigh gap, right? And I took this body change as something's wrong. I'm doing something wrong. I'm eating too much. And even though I was just listening to my body at the time and my body was settling into the body it was meant to be at, I really took that as I must be doing something wrong. Therefore, I have to control. I have to gain control of my body, of my eating. And so that began a long string of yo-yo dieting, restricting, and then binging. I I would eat super super clean from Monday to Friday, but then I would binge on the weekend, and that turned into an eating disorder, which is, I don't know if you've talked about it on your podcast, but orthorexia. So I developed this unhealthy obsession with being healthy, and I would count every single step, every single calorie. I was so hyper focused on food in my body that I literally could not focus on anything else. I lost my social life, I lost my friends. This was during my university years. So that was really tough because I didn't want to go out to restaurants, I didn't want to go out to bars. And like I said, it developed into this unhealthy obsession with being healthy. And of course, I lost weight. I was underweight, under what my body should be at, because if you have to overly restrict and you have to over exercise in order to maintain a certain weight, that's not the weight that your body is meant to fall at. And I always thought, when I get to this certain goal weight, then I'll be able to be happy. Then I'll be able to relax. Then my whole life is just going to magically change. And I'm sure that a lot of your listeners can relate to this as well, of like, it never is enough. Like, even when we get to a specific body size, when we maybe hit a specific weight, it never feels like enough because you hated yourself every step there. You hated yourself thin. And so you never step on the scale and then overnight decide, oh, I can love myself now because I'm at a certain number. And so it really was like there was this body dysmorphia because I would look at myself in the mirror. I was underweight, and yet I still felt like I had weight to lose. So long story short, I hit my diet rock bottom where I just could no longer live this way. I was unhealthy. My hair was thinning out. Like I said, I was severely depressed, fatigued all the time, and I took a drastic step. I decided to go to Italy for the summer and expose myself to a bunch of foods and cultures that terrified me, being around carbs and not having full control over my food. And it was being there that I realized that life is about so much more than the way that your body looks. And when you actually let go of that control, you're going to step into the healthiest life that you can live, because then you can actually prioritize self-care and not focus on shrinking your body at all cost. So that was really a huge mindset shift for me. I came back, decided that I needed to help other women too, because I'm sure that there's millions and millions of women who are suffering from this, who are suffering from diet culture. So I started my practice as a holistic health coach, and now I have my own program, Food Freedom Academy, where, like I said, I help chronic dieters break free from that diet culture and just come back into their bodies, learn how to eat without the guilt and the tracking and the obsession, and feel good in their here and now body, regardless of what it looks like.
Well, there's a couple of things that I think are really interesting about your story, of which, I mean, it's unique, but it's not uncommon. This is probably
Mhm.
the best way to say it, is that so many of my clients and our listeners in midlife, like, they remember seeing their bodies change around 8 years old, 9 years old, 10, 12, right? Around that puberty time. And that's, for many of them, that's kind of their reckoning of like, oh, and to your words, to use that point, like, oh, my body is going to be a different size than I am right now, which I hope so. Like, we shouldn't look like we're 12 for
Yeah.
the rest of our life. But for you and your story, I think what's interesting is because that synchronized swimming was such a strong component of those young developmental stage life. Like, you really didn't know what your full adult body was going to look like until
No.
you stopped swimming. And it's also interesting on those messages that you were getting from folks. It was almost like, don't grow into your adult body.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though when you're competing in a sport that is so weight or aesthetic focused during puberty, you really didn't get a chance to, your body didn't get a chance to grow up, so to speak, until you stopped. But then
Yeah.
the whole like mindset that had to happen around that for you to be okay with, oh, okay, now it's time for my body to mature. That's really what needed to happen. But
Yeah.
again, all of the cultural messaging and the shame around like, well, we're just looking at it as weight gain. We're not looking at it as maturing into adulthood.
Yeah, and there was just the biggest word I could use for that period of time was resistance. There was resistance to the body that I was meant to be in. There was resistance to my genetic blueprint, because my body inherently, I like hold my weight in my thighs. Like I have these big, strong thunder thighs, and back then I had this obsession with having a thigh gap. And there's so much cultural messages about if you just have enough willpower, if you just try hard enough, you can make your body do whatever you want. Like you can manipulate it. And so I thought if I wasn't able to make myself have a thigh gap, I wasn't able to make myself have these skinny, skinny legs, it must mean that there was something wrong with me because I don't have enough willpower. I'm not trying hard enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at it from that genetic blueprint, and I'm right there with you too, I used to feel a lot of shame for my thighs also. And then I learned, and this has been somewhat recently, say in the last handful of years ago, my family went to visit where my dad's family is from. So my dad is an American, but his family was from middle Europe, like Croatia, Montenegro, to be more specific. And they were mountain people. Like they lived in this village up above more of the commerce center, and they hiked up and down from the small village where they lived down to where the markets were. You know, they were farmers, they cured their own meat, all of this, but they needed really strong legs to be carrying all of their goods back and forth to market. And then as it turns out, one of my, cousins, something removed, he is now a hiking guide. And so we like our family is meant to be in the mountains. I mean, there's no secret by why my practice is called alpine nutrition, and mountains were a part of my healing food and body story too. But it was such an aha moment to put that together with my genetic blueprint of like my family heritage, because I am built more like my dad than like my mom, so I have those super strong legs.
Hmm.
And they went on to carry me to be a professional marathon runner and then a bike commuter and now just a for fun cyclist and hiker and backpacker. But it took recognizing like, hey, here's my ancestors needed this body part to be this way for
Hmm.
their survival. And I just now ended up inheriting that too, even though I'm in a culture that's especially for women, it's like, no, we need to have the thigh gap. If my
Yeah.
ancestors had a thigh gap, they would not be earning any money hauling their goods back and forth from their village to the market down below.
Yeah,
So
and that's so interesting. I've never even like thought of it that way, but you mentioned like you inherited that from your dad. And we're five kids in my family. I'm the youngest of five. And I have one sister, and so the only women in my family are my mom and my sister and me. And my sister definitely inherited my mom's body frame. My mom is like really petite. She's 5'4", and my sister is also very petite. I think she's also like 5'3", 5'4". And me and the men in my family really inherited my dad's side. My dad is like this muscular, 6 feet tall. Like I'm 5'8". And I remember always comparing myself to the women in my family, to my sister, and thinking again, like, okay, well, I should be able to look like them. We're in the same family. And I know that a lot of women that I work with, and probably you as well, have like those family members who look different from them. And that creates even more of that shame. It feels like a personal failure that we can't look like them. And then we spend our whole life resisting our bodies because instead of accepting that, like, this is the body that we're born in, and the more we resist it, the more likely we actually are to gain more weight over time and to feel more loathing towards our bodies.
Absolutely. And I think what you said that hits the nail on the head is, as women, we compare ourselves to the other women in our families and or the culture, because we're taught like this is what it is to be feminine, or this is what it is to, be beautiful as a woman or be attractive as a woman. And more in recent years, I think we're getting this movement of being active, being strong, being toned. It can be feminine. Having said that, I think there's a bit of toxicity that's coming with that as well,
Hmm.
but still very different than, say, like what our moms or what our grandmothers would have gone through. Like being athletic, like would have not been okay at all in terms of
Hmm.
femininity or beauty. So at least the tides are turning a little bit now. If we can just accept like all bodies, all sizes, being athletic as being beautiful and not trying to put an aesthetically pleasing spin on being
Yeah.
toned. We've got a ways to go. But one of the things that you said there, just in that last comment too, is kind of pointing us toward this idea of set point theory. And other guests have brought this up too, but I think it's worth bringing up and reviewing again. In something that you said there was, when we try to deny our set point weight theory, or when we are denying our weight set point by dieting, by over exercising, we're actually setting ourselves up for potentially increasing
Hmm.
that weight set point. So talk to us a little bit more about that, and how you see that play out.
Yeah, and so our bodies, we've been talking about a genetic blueprint, but our bodies the same way that like we're born with a specific like we're going to grow into a specific size shoe, and it's going to remain relatively stable once you hit adulthood. We have a specific color hair, color eyes. We have a genetic blueprint when it comes to our weight, and it's not a specific point. It's not, I'm set to be 150 and I'm going to stay 150 my whole life. It's a range. And scientifically speaking, it's usually a range between 10 to 20 pounds. And that's the body, the size and the weight at which your body feels comfortable and can maintain with relatively low effort, right? And so that's having some joyful movement into your life, right? Of course, if you spend your entire day sitting and you don't make an effort to go for walks or do movement that you enjoy, that might not feel great for your body. Of course, if you're not making any effort to include vegetables or protein or foods that make you feel good, then your body won't sit at that set point weight. But it really is that weight that feels good and feels comfortable. And the thing about our set point weight is that we don't have that much control over it. And I always compare it to, so one of my best friends growing up, we were swimmers together. She was on my team, and she was just naturally built just a little bit bigger, and she was a little bit shorter as well. And oh, did she get some hate in the swimming world, and because her body was not quote unquote the natural synchronized swimming body. One of my coaches actually had called her a bulldog body. um and so I look at her, and she did a cookie diet. She did Jenny Craig. I mean, she did Weight Watchers. She did all those because she was in that environment being told that there was something wrong with her body. But she was, when she was not dieting, was so healthy. She was training 20 hours a week like I was. She was eating well. She was so healthy. But because everyone was giving her these messages that there was something wrong with her body, she just resisted it. And over time, of course, she did that yo-yo dieting, and thankfully now she has really accepted her genetic blueprint, and it's been years that she hasn't gone into that world. But I always compare it to that because we tend to disbelieve the fact that it's possible to be healthy at a bigger weight. But when we go to a dog park and we see a golden retriever and a chihuahua and a bulldog, and a Great Dane, we don't judge that dog's healthiness based off their body size. I think everyone can agree that there are so many different body sizes when it comes to dogs, but we've been conditioned to believe that there's one acceptable body size when it comes to humans. And it doesn't help that you go on social media and about the 5% of people who have that body size represent like 95% of the content that you see. And so we don't see body diversity. We don't see different bodies. We see one body that we compare ourselves to. And then we think that if we eat that way and if we exercise that way, then we can manipulate our bodies to look that way too. And then we end up just resisting against our body and going into this restrictive, over exercising mindset. And our bodies, our set point weight, it does not want to fall below that. And so when we do start losing that weight, and I've been there, I've been under my set point weight, and you feel it when you're there. You feel it because you're tired. You're always hungry. You have cravings. You're thinking about food all the time. That's not because there's something wrong with you. That's because your body is telling you something. Your body is trying to communicate, this doesn't feel right. And so, why don't we start making our way back up to eating enough food so we can fall back at that point where we feel comfortable, we feel healthy, and we can function optimally?
So I'm just channeling some of our wonderful midlife listeners, and they're going to go, okay, Sabrina, it's all fine and dandy. I get it. I've experienced it with the diets that I've been through. But then I hit 40 and I haven't been dieting. Yeah, I could probably move a little bit more, but life is crazy. But my weight has just come out of nowhere, like has
Mhm.
skyrocketed. So how does that midlife weight gain, the perimenopause symptom of weight gain, how does that tie into this weight set point theory? What's going on there?
Yeah, so there's different factors that affect our set point weight. So there's the genetics, which is something that we have little control over. There is the environmental lifestyle factor. So there is, as we get older, we do have muscle loss. A lot of people stop moving as frequently as you mentioned. And so we start losing muscle and start gaining fat. And we know that muscle is more expensive when it comes to fuel. And so it is easier to stay in better shape when you have more muscle. So there is that lifestyle factor, that there's stressors, there's kids, there's less time for movement. And then there is that dip in estrogen that happens. And so hormones play into our set point weight. People who have PCOS, for example, do tend to see weight gain as well because of our estrogen dip. And so we do tend to gain weight around our stomach area. And it is difficult to accept that. And of course there are ways to mitigate that, getting some regular movement, making sure that you do strength training, especially as you get older. Strength training becomes really important, making sure that you do still maintain some of those like simple guidelines when it comes to eating. You don't want to go into that restrictive mindset, but including protein to make sure that you're maintaining that muscle, including vegetables, drinking your water, making sure that you're taking care of your stress levels, because cortisol also plays into that. When you're constantly stressed, your cortisol is up, you're more likely to hold on to that weight. And so of course there's some things that we can focus on, but when we focus so much on the weight gain and we start seeing it as something wrong with us and we think that we're losing control, what tends to happen is that people stop reflecting on the habits that they might be able to improve on, right? And they start focusing on the restriction right away. And whenever I'm talking to someone, I was actually on a call with a woman who reached out to me today, and she was that woman. She was telling me, I'm 50, I've gained a lot of weight, I stopped dieting. She actually is exactly what you just described now that I think about it. I stopped dieting 8 months ago, and I'm the biggest that I ever have been. And I just want to feel healthy, and I just want to wear clothes that makes me feel good, and I want to be able to exercise. And instead of focusing on, okay, well, let's go into the restriction mindset, is I asked her, like, okay, what habits might be contributing to not feeling good in your body. And how do you feel it in your body? Because if we're focusing on health, in what ways do you not feel healthy? And then we were able to look at the habits in her life that could, she was saying, I don't get as much regular movement as I was getting in before, and I'm not sleeping super well, and I feel like I'm stressed, and I tend to overeat. And so then we can look at, I saw that and said, okay, number one, we should look at how can we maybe just get some more walking in, 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, something that's doable for you. If you notice that you're overeating frequently, maybe we're struggling with listening to our bodies, and we can do some mindful exercises, some mindful eating exercises to tune into your body and eat in a way that feels more relaxed and feels more in tune with your body. And so looking at those habits puts you back in control, because if you're focusing on weight and you feel like your weight is out of control, you feel really powerless, because weight is not a behavior. Weight is not something that we can snap our fingers and decide I'm going to weigh 180 pounds tomorrow. It's the behaviors, the habits that we can focus on, and that puts us more in the driver's seat of our life at that point.
I think that's really well said too. And, midlife is this kind of time of unraveling, and it's definitely a time that's perfect for undieting our lives. But it's also really helpful to understand what's going on physiologically so that we don't fall into that mindset of like, this is my fault, I failed somewhere, I'm doing something wrong.
Mhm.
And like you said, taking that energy away from focusing on health promoting behaviors and putting that towards the scale, because the scale is going to go up and down for a variety of reasons anyway. And there
Mhm.
was some somewhat recent research that was done around weight gain in midlife, and what the researchers found was that yes, weight gain it's a common party favor of midlife, but related to the estrogen piece or related just the fact that people were aging. And it was as much about just aging in general because people weren't moving as much. Their lives were busy and complicated. There's a lot going on in midlife. And so I think that that was an interesting point to notice too, so that we don't get stuck in this tug of war with our bodies.
Mhm.
Yes, we're going to have some weight gain happen with the estrogen fluctuation, but then also there's opportunities to, if someone wants to not fall into the habit of like, nope, this is just the way I live my life now that I'm taking care of teenagers and my job at an advanced level in my career and my older parents and all of, like, it just is what it is. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. But I think people get stuck in that mindset because we like to make things too complicated. We're trying to make food too complicated. We're trying to make exercise too complicated. So to your point too, like 5 minutes, can we go for a walk for 5 minutes?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to, we don't have to set up as many barriers as our minds like to because of our life situation. But again, we wouldn't have the energy for that if we were focusing on the scale so much.
Exactly. And when we look at our weight, just at our weight, and we focus on just the food, then we get really overwhelmed, because a lot of people have an all or nothing mentality when it comes to food, and they start thinking about all the things that they have to take out and they have to change. And so what I really recommend to anyone who is starting to feel that powerlessness, they don't feel good in their bodies, they don't feel like they have control, is number one, assess your habits, assess the areas in your life that you feel like you've been neglecting. So if you feel like it's your sleep, that you need to prioritize your sleep, because we know how important sleep is in regulating your hormones, your hunger hormones, your eating habits, your overall mental health. I don't know about you, but like if I don't get a good night's sleep, the next day sucks. And so looking at which areas of your life maybe has been neglected. Maybe it is you don't feel like you're super connected when you're eating anymore. And so maybe you're eating out of hunger. Maybe you're eating for emotional reasons. Maybe you tend to overeat because you're mindless. It's habitual. Looking at the different areas of your life that you may feel are out of balance. And so if there's a few, start with one that feels relatively easy, right? You don't want to overwhelm yourself, but start with one. So if it's you feel like you're regularly overeating at night, and it's because you're having a hard time listening to your body, then start with that and start super, super small. So maybe it's carving out 5 to 10 minutes without distractions to eat your food and learn how to reconnect to your body. If you're noticing that you haven't been prioritizing getting movement into your life, and that can be hard, you have kids and you have activities, the way I describe it to my clients is start so small that it almost seems too easy and it almost seems insignificant. And so if you want to get into the habit of walking 10 minutes a day, but that even seems too big, start by just putting your shoes on at the same time and stepping outside every day for a week and get used to being consistent. And then if after a week you are able to stay consistent for 7 days, make it a little bit harder. Step outside and walk to the end of the street. And the way that you know if you're ready to make it harder is to ask yourself, on a scale from 1 to 10, how confident am I that I can stick to this habit for the next 7 days? And if it's not a 7 on 10 or above, make it easier.
Oh, I love that strategy too. And what I have found too with my clients and kind of bringing this back to body image is that when we start small and making these improvements in our health promoting behaviors, we start to feel more confident, particularly around the movement piece, because movement helps us get in our bodies and paying attention to our bodies. And when we are first starting moving, if we haven't in a while, and you're noticing how your body is moving through space, yeah, there can be a lot of angst with that, and it can kind of tie into your body image. But I've also seen the same thing happen to where if someone starts nice and slow, very doable, very livable, and they watch themselves progress, then they start to feel better in their body image as well. There's a bit of
Yes.
confidence boost that comes along of like, oh, wow, I went from just putting my shoes on and stepping outside to walking to the end of the street to now I walk around the block. Like, my body's badass. Wonder what
Yeah.
else it can do too. And it just kind of starts a snowball effect.
Yeah, it's very hard to be kind to a body that you don't feel good in. And doing movement, it feels really good. No matter what, just going for like a 5 minute walk outside, it feels good. And it builds up our self-esteem, not necessarily in how our body looks, but in what we're capable of doing. And when we see ourselves being consistent, we feel better about ourselves. And a lot of the times I describe this like bad body image days aren't usually about the way that our bodies look. It's about the way that we feel about ourselves that we reflect onto the way that our body look. And so when I have a bad body image day, and it happens in all body sizes and it happens at all stages of your body image healing journey, no matter what, like I have a relatively, I would say, neutral body image. I see my body as a bag of skin that I walk around in and nothing more than that. But on those days where I feel like I see myself differently in the mirror, I remind myself that yesterday you didn't feel this bad. You haven't changed physically much in the past 24 hours. And so this is a reflection of how you feel about yourselves. This is a reflection of something else that's going on that you are putting onto your body. And so when you start feeling better about yourself, your body doesn't matter as much because you have worthiness inside in a different area of your life.
Yeah, that's really perfect, spot on. Um, where, Sabrina, would you like to send people to introduce them more to your work? I know you have a podcast as well. So if people want to learn more from you.
Yeah, so they can listen to my podcast. It's called Live Unrestricted, where we talk about all things body image, intuitive eating, mindset. I love talking about the psychology behind behavior change, as you can tell. So, Live Unrestricted, you can find it on all platforms, or they can find me on Instagram. I'm always there sharing tips as well at sabrina.magnan, Magnan.health.
Perfect. Great. Well, we'll put links to that in the show notes and make sure people can find you and keep learning more from you. So thanks so much for sharing your tips and your wisdom with us today. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.